Today I will be discussing Adam Taurus from RWBY. If you are currently watching this show but are not up to date on Volume 6, namely the most recent episode, please be aware that there are significant spoilers ahead. With that in mind, sit back, relax, and let's figure out how this character was ruined. Adam Taurus was a character introduced in the Black trailer for Monty Oum's original series RWBY. He is initially portrayed as a character of importance and later an antagonist. As a competent male character in a predominantly female-dominated show, many of us were curious about what the future held for his development. How would he fit into the story, as he obviously had a relationship with one of the show's protagonists, Blake Belladonna. We get the gist of his personality from this trailer: his willingness to let humans die, Blake's reluctance to allow such a thing to take place. We have established their parallel, both fighting for the same cause, but Blake has taken the more righteous path. Now, after Adam's introduction, we didn't get much insight into him as a character or as a person. All we were given was a brief hint that he was once someone of importance. Blake is seen fondly looking over a sketch done of him and his symbol. We are led to believe that she might not have left him so willingly and still holds feelings for him one way or the other. It was long since established that Blake and Adam are an ode to the Beauty and the Beast, with Adam obviously being the beast portion of that. His last name and horned appearance is tribute enough to support that claim. Now, the source material of this is wide and vast, but the general underlining belief is that one can come to love someone even if they view them as a beast at first. However, the voice actress of Blake caused some confusion when she said Adam was the Gaston to Blake's Belle. This could easily be interpreted as her view of things, given on how Adam behaves. Gaston was driven to violence after his obsessive love for Belle, whereas we only see Adam become obsessive after a certain point in the story, and there is virtually no build-up to it. So we, the fans, believe that Adam might be aggressive or crude in his methods, but his love for Blake would have been real, much like the original story, and maybe, just maybe, he might be able to reconcile whatever differences they have along the line. At the end of Volume 2, we are introduced to Adam Taurus, the leader of his own sect of White Fang loyalists, though it is only at the very end of the last episode. He steps forward to remark that while the White Fang would not listen to Cinder, they would listen to him. Volume 3 showed us two completely different versions of the same character. During a flashback episode with Cinder, we see that Adam is passionate about his cause and plans to leave, no longer bothering to pursue Blake. However, Cinder approaches him with an offer, a plan to change things. He initially refuses, berating Cinder and claiming that he refuses to allow his own men to die for a human cause. We have established his dislike of humans, though considering his parallel with Blake, this should have been a given. Whereas Blake looked down on the cruelty of humans and people, Adam refuses to stand by and let it happen. However, after Cinder gains power and returns with money and fresh dust, Adam's mind is presumably changed out of force. It seems that Cinder has threatened him into submission, forcing him to either accept her deal or face her wrath as a very capable enemy. Adam, who initially hates being aligned with a human cause, seemingly has no issues taking orders from one, though he initially comes off as an individual that is more than willing to die rather than submit. It could be theorized that Adam did not want unnecessary death and understood the threat that Cinder posed. This seems like a tiny deviation from who Adam is, and at first glance, it almost seems rational. He appears once more heading the attack and unleashing Grim on civilians, with the chilling words, "Bring them to their knees." Now we begin to see his other side, his cruel and unusual side. This is further exaggerated during his next appearance, where he is seen slaughtering humans, much to Blake's horror. They exchange a look, and the first thing Adam says to her is, "Hello, my darling." Now, I'll talk a little about this later, but right off the bat, this seems horribly out of character and just a weird way of greeting someone. Even if there was some past romance implied, this is just off, and I think most people will agree that it seems off. He set his attention onto her, stating that he wants to set the fires of revolution ablaze and that killing people was the only way to initiate the spark, which to most people does make sense. Adam is an extreme. He believes in revolution, and from what we've been told about the Faunus, they are oppressed, tortured, and hated race. In order to fight back, people like Adam were necessary, to use force when they were met with force. Adam, by all extents, is a necessary evil. Now his dynamic has shifted horribly in the final episodes of this volume, where he is no longer a level-headed leader or the bringer of a revolution, but an obsessive personality, one that hates Blake for abandoning him and ultimately comes off as pathetic. Adam claims he is going to destroy everything Blake loves in return for her betrayal, starting with Yang, whom he later bisects with a casual display of power that makes him appear to be on a completely different level. He aims to decapitate Blake soon after, without the slightest shred of hesitation, claiming that Blake's defiance was hurting him when she attempted to protect Yang from a final blow. This behavior, it just doesn't seem to fit the character. The voice acting team of RWBY state that Adam's behavior during this exchange came off as abusive, and they talk about how uncomfortable they are with it. This reaction was greatly received by fans who immediately began to dislike Adam's character for his behavior, whereas characters like Cinder, who murdered Pyrrha, are still glorified as being amazing and strong. Now let's double back here for just a moment. We initially established that Adam was a high-ranking member of the White Fang, a group of Faunus that aimed to rise up against human oppressors. Now, we know initially that the White Fang was peaceful, but these methods did not work, not until a more violent leader, which we presumed to be Adam, took over and started using force instead. Blake remarks that this method was actually working, and people were beginning to take the Faunus movement more seriously. Blake herself was condoning actions done by Adam, claiming that she initially thought she understood him, that he once stood for everything that was right, but eventually began to make mistakes. Mistakes that were heavily implied to be murder during conflict. He covered up these happenings, stating it was either an accident or out of his control. Later on, it became apparent that Adam was taking joy in doing these cruel acts during missions. Now, the wearing a mask, White Fang, was also implied to be Adam's doing, as he wanted to portray the monstrous side that humans associated the Faunus with. So Adam has been introduced as a violent man who cares deeply for his fellow Faunus and their cause, but understands that being peaceful will never solve anything, and sometimes brute force is the best way to get results. He even goes as far as to wear a mask of Grimm to inflict fear on his opponents. Here we have a man that appears to have been horribly wronged by humans, but we don't know the extent or why. He displays characteristics of a wounded, troubled, and tortured man, but he is not at conflict within himself. Rather, he is focused and rational, until he is reintroduced, when he begins to display a serious obsessive behavior with Blake, as far as to disregard his initial mission just to torment her and make his vendetta against her so personal that it extends across the whole world. His originally established persona is ripped away, and I assume they were attempting to give us a glimpse at what he was like beneath the mask, but it only came off as a quick bastardization of a character. The character himself did not have much established, but definitely had enough to be an interesting personality, especially since both Blake and Adam take up two opposite sides of how to approach saving the Faunus from prejudice. Instead, he is just a straight-up douchebag. I don't know how to say this without coming off as a generic member of the fandom, but it comes off as lazy writing, shoehorning in a dislikable personality for the sole purpose of making a main and protagonist appear more gentle and holier than thou. His frequent uses of the strange "my love" and "my darling" just seem out of place. Throughout their conflict, Adam is berating Blake for being a coward and running away from their cause, which, to be fair, she admits she is a coward and always runs away. This is like the centerpiece of her whole character arc, is overcoming this impulse to run and hide. To some extent, Adam's hate towards her seems warranted. She abandoned the White Fang's cause, but more than that, she abandoned Adam, who appears to have previously established a romance with Blake. This much is understandable. She saw the cause was becoming more violent and geared towards murder instead of peace, so she decided to flee. Adam views her fleeing as a personal insult, either to himself or their cause overall, and as such it is his duty to hunt down and kill any defectors, perhaps due to the massive amount of information they could potentially have on the White Fang's inner workings or future plans. This reasoning would make sense. It would explain why Adam has decided to attack Beacon and why he is focused on finding and killing Blake. She is a traitor. Now, during this conflict, they could have made Adam hesitate, perhaps showing that he still had feelings for her, but is bound by duty to such an extent that his cause has become so much more and is now his way of life, and he must strike her down or risk betraying himself. Instead, Adam appears to have an obsession with Blake that comes off as both stalkerish and creepy, totally unbecoming of the character himself. But even if there was some strange obsession with Blake, it could have been portrayed in a more subtle manner. During the flashback where he refuses to aid a human cause, Cinder's cause, we see Adam's lieutenant insisting that they will find Blake again, staking his life on it. And Adam's obsessive nature is completely absent here. He instead remarks to forget it, and that he should be returning to Mistral, most likely to kill the current leader of the White Fang and take control of all remaining fractions. This appeared to be his true goal from the beginning, as we soon later out find on that Sienna is so much more of a reluctant of using Adam's methods, but has kept him around due to how much influence he has on the White Fang itself, as many of the soldiers now view Sienna as weak and Adam as strong. My point here is that at some point in the writing process, someone managed to shoehorn this deliberate character change into the character of Adam and twist him, obviously with the intent of making him appear as a jealous, abusive ex-boyfriend that everyone can collectively hate and regard as creepy, manipulative, or pathetic. Now, a lot of these changes happen later on, but there are still moments where Monty's vision for the character can still shine through, and we'll get to that. But before we get too much into that, let's continue. Adam's overall influence in the series is dulled until Volume 5, where he finally realizes his rise to power and strikes down the former leader of the White Fang, officially taking control and now allowing Salem to have a powerful ally. Although this part doesn't make too much sense. We were briefly led to believe that Adam was allied with Cinder, but nowhere was there an implication that Adam was aware of Salem or directly speaking with any of her associates. He briefly attempts an attack that results in his complete and utter embarrassment. Not only that, Blake and he finally meet after their incident at Beacon, and Adam is provoked into a senseless charge forward that Blake easily sidesteps and puts down Adam with a single attack. Many fans found this to be an awful scene, and even more awful writing. Adam comes off as whiny and pathetic, not quite the powerful Faunus leader he was previously established to be. He lets his emotions get the best of him and easily gets batted aside like he was a second-rate throwaway character. At this point, we can finally understand exactly what the writers have in store for us. Blake is righteous, Blake's cause is non-violent, and she understands love and peace is the key. Adam is not righteous, Adam is wicked and violent, and he cannot hope to stand up to Blake. There was no character growth given to Adam during this moment. Instead, he is effectively mocked and looked down on. All his skill and tactical ability is gone. Now he only appears to be a hot-headed, bloodthirsty, and impulsive loser. Instead of having Blake and Adam fight for a second time, the writers opted to have Blake deal with him casually. Adam escapes though, and sure to return, he has lost his mask. The monster facade is now gone, and now he only has himself. Adam later appears slaughtering White Fang, who mock him for his embarrassing defeat at the hands of Blake, and resolves to resume the hunt of Blake, for whatever reason. Fast forward to Volume 6. Adam somehow manages to locate Blake and get her alone, and this time Blake doesn't manage to one-hit Adam. Their fight is interesting, though Adam's obsessive stalker personality is amplified throughout it. He is maddened by her betrayal. He mocks her for running. He pursues her, and this time he certainly means business. He manages to break Gamble's shroud and force Blake into a corner, remarking that she left him alone and now she is alone. But of course Blake is not alone, and Yang manages to appear at the last second, white knighting pretty hard here as she begins to engage Adam with the sacrifice of her motorcycle, which didn't make too much sense to me, but whatever. Prior to this, we have the only interesting writing left in this show for this character. Adam removes his blindfold to reveal a horrible brand over his left eye. The letters SDC are clear, the Schnee Dust Company. They have been previously established as being spearheads of the hate for the Faunus, as well as using the Faunus as a cheap source of labor, to the extent that it could be considered slavery. Blake was very passionate about this in Volume 1 and 2. Everything about Adam begins to make sense. He says he has been hurt plenty of times, in many different ways, by many different people. He received this scar from presumably a young age, and since has had his mentality shifted. He was treated like less than a human, and therefore views all humans in the same way as the ones who tortured him. This was brilliant. Making a villain that people can understand and even feel for is brilliant writing. Adam's character finally made sense. This was undoubtedly due to the original writing of the character, and later we see how the writers treat this interesting character development. Now that Yang is here, things take a turn. We finally get a glimpse into Adam's semblance as Blake provides exposition. He can absorb damage through his sword, store it, and use it whenever he wants. This part was pretty interesting because belittles the ability. She says, he gets to dish out damage without having to feel it. Sigh. That's just cheap. I don't know about you guys, but I felt like this line was just completely not cool. Yang's own ability makes her a powerhouse. With each hit she receives by a superior fighter, she gets stronger in direct portion. Her semblance is rightfully described as a temper tantrum that lets her bridge the skill gap between her and an opponent almost instantaneously. For example, when fighting Mercury, she receives a large amount of damage and is seemingly overwhelmed and outskilled, and soon after rises from her defeat and manages to turn the tables. This can be rationalized, as when fighting Neo manages to knock her out before she has a chance to use this ability in an effective way. However, the point stands that Yang's ability, and most abilities in the series, even Blake's, can be considered cheap. So this comment was just unnecessary, and the writers are further trying to establish that Adam is not only a creepy, pathetic, and manipulative person, but even his semblance is cheap and sad. I mean, seriously, Blake's ability literally lets her escape death like 6-7 times in the whole show. It's like ridiculous. That's cheap. And here's an offhanded comment about Adam's fighting style throughout this whole engagement, as well as the way they decided to animate him, but it straight up looks like a Virgil ripoff, and as much as I love Virgil and as much as I love the character Adam, they should have just branched away from this, because as soon as the black trailer dropped, everybody was saying that Adam looks basically like Virgil, so they should have, changed this a little bit, just gearing away from it, and it seems like they just embraced it fully and just went head first into it. Anywho, Yang's arm somehow takes a direct hit from Adam's enhanced mode, which to me just seemed off in a way that I might explain later. Now, after they've fought for a bit more, Adam continues to whine throughout the entire fight about why Blake chose her, stating that Yang isn't as fast as him as he engages her, clearly displaying the fact that yes, Yang is not as fast as him. At the climax, Adam aims to do a seemingly fatal blow, only to have his blade caught casually by the now semblance-enhanced Yang, who, in a cringy display of writing, states to Adam, "I'm not faster, but I am smarter," before punching him so hard his aura is broken. Now, I might be nitpicking here, but what part of grabbing a sword is smart, especially one that is enhanced like Adam's, and one that he can store energy in and release at will? If anything, that play is horribly reckless. To the further extent, in what world does this actually work? How is this a plan? How is this besting a villain? If this hadn't worked, she would have lost the arm again and potentially have been killed. It doesn't make sense. Regardless of whether or not it worked, it was definitely not smart. And this again is just the writers attempting to further insist that Adam is not only creepy, pathetic, manipulative with a cheap and sad semblance, but he's also stupid. This leads to a chain of events that I have mixed feelings about. And again, if you have not seen this episode or don't understand what I'm talking about, please do not watch any further, as this is a major spoiler. Yang throws away Adam's sword. He pathetically screams about this and is quickly punched by Blake, who pulls a Naruto appearing out from beneath him. Adam springs for the shattered Gamble shroud, but he is closed in on both sides by Blake and Yang, who both manage to somehow grab the pieces before he can, and impale him from front and back. As I said, I have mixed feelings about this. Yes, Adam needed to be properly defeated, and yes, Adam needed to die. It was the only course they had left after they twisted this character so much. But how can I put this? It doesn't feel like Blake or Yang earned this victory. Furthermore, it didn't make too much sense. Adam loses his sword and appears to fall apart just from losing his weapon. But Adam still has his sheath. He still has Wilt. His sheath that can transform into a gun or simply be used as a blunt object to stand in for his sword. Instead of reaching for it, which is at his hip, he decides to go for a weapon on the ground. Not only that, without his sword, Adam can't fight. Are they so determined to reduce his character to this pathetic mess of a man who can't get a grip on anything? He could have thrown a punch, drew his sheath, or even tried to distance himself from them like a rational man would, to understand that at that moment he had been defeated and shouldn't press the issue. To live and fight another day, if he really wanted vengeance that bad, he should have put his life above his vengeance. It doesn't make sense. That is until we realize that the writers simply didn't want this character alive anymore, due to his obsessive and abusive nature that they themselves wrote into existence. They have decided that he should not be anymore. Finally, Adam's character is interesting. He has been unmasked and we see a glimpse of a once rational man. He even appears to hesitate when Yang tells him to leave them alone. It looks like he would seriously consider backing off. But of course, in the next episode, he doesn't. Now, there are people saying that Adam might come back from this, but to be honest, I can't really entertain that thought. If they try to write this character back to life, they have failed on more than one level. Cinder already returned from her presumed death in a very similar manner, so we can safely assume that rehashing this will do nothing to get anyone on their side. So my question to RWBY and all of Roosterteeth and the animators and anybody that had a hand in writing this story is, why? Why did they make these bizarre changes to Adam's character? Why have they attempted to make him the blunt end of every failure, to make every aspect of his personality seem feeble and sad? Well, the answer that I've come up with might surprise you. For many of us RWBY fans, RWBY has begun to go downhill. Most people mark this pivotal change at around Volume 4, whereas most claim Volume 2 is the highlight and Volume 3 has the best fights. But really, the absence of the creator Monty Oum is obvious. His influence in the earlier volumes is what made his story so great and interesting. He was unbiased and he never felt the need to shoehorn real-world politics into the show, and instead created a unique political issue with the Faunus and the humans. RWBY's fight scenes suffered considerably, though during Volume 6 they have begun to get a little bit more of their old feel back, and even the animation has appeared more smooth than the original. However, with these changes comes something else. It is no stranger to anyone that follows RWBY or Roosterteeth's crew on social media that they are extremely left-leaning when it comes to politics, and once we understand what that means, we begin to see how they've changed the story to fit that narrative. Recently, we've had our introduction of a same-sex couple. The first introduction of a same-sex couple, unless you count that one Faunus slideshow that happened during Volume 4. And it came off as a bit forced and a bit of a stretch. Even more so how casually it was addressed, made to appear as though there was never an issue in the first place. In this world, they hate people who are Faunus or date Faunus more than they hate same-sex couples. And to me, that just came off as weird. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind same-sex couples, love who you love and all that, but even a close friend of mine, who happens to be lesbian, said she found this to just be weird and out of place. She felt that it didn't happen organically and that instead it seems like they kind of forced it in there to appeal to a certain demographic of their customer base. A lot of RWBY fans are hoping or longing for Blake and Yang to be a lesbian couple or any other different matches that they've had. So it's not unfounded for the fact that RWBY has put this specific couple in here to give them the implication that yes, it is possible and maybe it will happen. But I feel that the real indicator of this is in the treatment of Adam's character, who due to bad writing was viewed as an obsessive, abusive ex-boyfriend, and therefore was dragged through the mud and wasted with no development and instead a string of irrational emotions. Blake originally regards him with fear, but now whenever they interact, she just responds as if he's creepy or stalking her. They have belittled his character to the point where even his death, which should have been an impactful, dramatic scene, just fell ill. I'll happily claim this is due to heavy social justice warrior influence in RWBY's team. They revere powerful, strong women, but hate men. An example of this is Crow's character in the last volume has been degraded to an alcoholic who gives up on the world as soon as he hits a single bump in the road. But RWBY and the gang, they sure are determined and strong. Despite Crow's history as being a secret black ops agent who was constantly at the end of knowing everything was a lie and there was a mistrust in the world, he had never given up hope and instead did his job to a T. Now, he's just pathetic, and I don't understand this. This is just my observation, though, as I feel that the writers aren't doing the characters justice and instead just forcing the story and interactions to fit a certain narrative. For another example, Yang finally confronts Adam, and she appears to still be shaking, still suffering from the traumatic event where she lost her arm to him, but quickly gets over this, and even risks that very same arm, artificial or not, to defeat him. Adam has a vicious brand over his eye from the Schnee, but instead of pursuing and attempting to kill Weiss, his focus is solely on Blake. It feels that Adam would feel more betrayed that Blake has taken up Weiss as a comrade, especially with what has been done to him. Of course, as something I've come to realize about this fan base is that they are incredibly toxic. Every now and then a rational fan will comment about their dislike of certain aspects of the writing and will be immediately flooded by droves of people insulting them for not liking it, or claiming that they're sexist or that they just don't like the heavy lesbian overtones, whatever it is. And, well, that's just a risk I'm going to have to take and hope that saner heads prevail. I've been a fan of this show from day one. I've met Monty Oum in person and I adored his work as well as his message. And there has been a palpable perversion to that work, and it just comes off as insulting to the creator. I understand it is a predominantly female show and I've never had any problems with it until now. It just feels preachy and holier than thou. When character development is sacrificed so you can pronounce how much better other characters are, you've essentially failed at writing. In my opinion, Adam has received the blunt of this. Introduced as an interesting villain but reduced to cannon fodder and thrown to the wolves. There are other characters who have suffered, but that's for another time. If you like this video, be sure to leave a comment and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, be sure to comment and argue with me about how you feel Adam was a terrible character. But remember, argue, don't insult. Otherwise, I'm just not going to feel the need to respond. Also, as a bit of fun, recently Mercury revealed that his father has stole his semblance from him. What do you guys think his semblance is? And do you think he will ever get it back? Let me know. Until next time, guys.